Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where you can create the life you crave. With me, Dr. A, as a psychologist for over 30 years, a transformational life coach, and an expert in self-empowerment, my life's work has been inspired by the beautifully powerful resilience of the human spirit. We will share stories and successes of people who have not only overcome personal adversity, but have used their traumas and hardships courageously as a springboard into greatness. Create positive transformational shifts on your way to achieving phenomenal success. Get ready to level up as you move beyond the challenging terrain of your life's journey into the empowered living zone. Ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision, the Empowered Living Zone show starts now. Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where we explore self-empowerment, personal growth, and the journey to becoming our best selves. I'm Dr. A, your host, and today we are diving into a topic that can truly transform how we navigate relationships, all kinds of relationships, whether they're personal, professional, even our relationships with ourselves. We're talking about the power we create when we shift from holding on to expectations to making agreements. So settle in and let's embark on the journey together. And my guest today is Dr. Pat Baccili. Dr. Pat is an international award-winning talk radio host, the founder of Transformation Network and Transformation Talk Radio. She is well respected in her various roles in the human potential field, and she has received numerous awards for her empowering radio messages. Welcome, Dr. Pat.
Yeah, I am so glad we're talking about this. I'm hoping that throughout the show, we can really put some clarity for people. But even more importantly, there's an impact. You know, there is an end game to what happens between the dance that we have between expectations and agreements. And may I say outcomes. There's this little dance. Sometimes it's a rumba and sometimes it's a waltz, but you got to know which dance to do at what time.
Absolutely. We got a lot to unpack here, don't we, Dr. Pat? You know, it's interesting.
Great.
Yeah, this is a subject that I witness or visit quite frequently with my clients, particularly my couples. Expectation comes up a lot, and they can be really tricky, can't they?
Oh,
go for it.
Well, the two things that we should talk about for a minute, and this was critical in my research, really. I was shocked when I went back to school to study to find that they had never studied. In the academic world, these are called psychological contracts. It's a fancy name for promises. But I was really shocked to find that at the time, they never had ever studied the agreements between two people. All of the research was about an organization or an employee or an organization and a customer, but never people. And so I was shocked because my corporate experience was like, okay, we know we don't trust the company. Okay, let's just put that on our table right there. Okay, I don't care what you say. Your vision is awful. You don't have any, right? We go through that. Or we say, I love my company. I got the t-shirt. But the real problem comes between what you just said, people, a couple. They're not two buildings, they're people. And what I love about this is you have to look at two things. There's the explicit, honey, when I come home, I don't want the TV on. I've just told you that. Honey, time goes by, the TV's never on when he or she or they get home. But all of a sudden, the TV gets turned on. No words are spoken because the other partner needs to watch the TV to learn about how to do their job better, but they never have a conversation. So what happens with that silly little thing, and I'm saying it's silly, but it's major. What happens with that is that becomes a wound. You broke your promise. Why? Explicitly, I ask you. Now, those are easy. When you ask somebody for something explicitly, it's easy. But let's talk about something different. Let's talk about a company you work for that basically says that you're going to get time off for childcare, maybe. Let's just talk about that. You see it in the policies. It's nobody says it to you. It's just there. You know you're going to get it. And then you actually have to enact it. And for some strange reason, even though the policy says you can do this, what happens between you and your direct boss is atrocious. No words are spoken. It's an implicit. It's something that says, I can do this, but in reality, you can't. These are the hidden things of expectation that cause us to go down a rabbit hole with no ladder to get out. And if you have a lot of them, which I'd love for you to talk about the couples, because OMG, if you have a lot of those things that implicitly you think that you have an agreement and therefore you form an expectation only to find out you don't, you're wounded, you're hurt, promises are broken, you're resentful, and now what? So tell me about your couple. Any of that happen?
Well, and I want to, before we go into some of my experience with couples, I really want to make sure that we unpack and clearly define what I mean by expectations.
Yes, please, because it's confusing.
It is, and especially within the context of relationships. So, we all have expectations, and oftentimes our expectations are unconscious and definitely unspoken. And what is an expectation? So an expectation is basically a belief that we hold that somebody should act in a particular way, or we should act in a particular way, or a situation or the world should unfold in a particular way. And one thing that I want to highlight is we know that we are in expectation when we use the word should. So that is always the red flag. When we are, and I often joke with my clients, stop shoulding all over yourself. Should is a big red flag that we are in expectation. And, what I found is, why are we so hell-bent on expectations? Why do we hold on to them so tightly? And there really is a good reason for this. Expectation gives us a false sense of control over the world. If people act in a particular way, if they act in the way that we expect them to act, or if events unfold in the way that we expect them to, then it's predictable and we get what we want and we feel safe. The problem is we don't typically have the cooperation of others or the world. And that's when we'll get into agreements later down the road. And so what I found this mostly, it was just obvious with my couples. I see it in a lot of my work with clients, but it really, really is very amplified in couples relationships. And what I've seen, for example, is I've seen this where a partner will say, well, I don't want to tell him or her or they how I feel. They should just know, or they should just know what I need. Why do I need to say what I need? Or a big one is I often see this with heterosexual couples where the male partner is complaining about the lack of or the limited or diminished sexual intimacy in the relationship. And he can get quite angry and say, this is my need and my partner should just meet my needs. And the problem with that statement is it's not taking into consideration the other person's perspective, needs, wants. It's a dictate. It's a requirement. And that just does not work well in relationships. And, one thing that I want to highlight that I think is really, really important about this is when we get into this place of expectation, basically what we are doing is we're giving up our power. We are giving up our power to the other person. We're basically handing over our well-being and our state of happiness and get to the other person. And that is a problem, especially when the other person doesn't have the same perspective we do, or that the other person doesn't have the same wants, desires, values, needs. It can be really problematic.
Yeah. I mean, I wish that couples, so let's talk about couples. This has nothing to do with age. I don't care if you're marrying the first time or moving in the first time, or it's your 15th time, or maybe you're Elizabeth Taylor. But here's the thing that I really wish. There's a body of work that's important. I know you do it and I know I do it. It is the pre-nuptial relationship conversation that doesn't have to do with prenup money. But what it has to do with is sitting down and look, how many couples have you worked with, right? Especially, I love working with newlyweds. I love this. And all of a sudden, they think we're married and nothing's going to change. So let's just start that. Example. I always play softball. I'm making it up, but this is true. They always play softball 5 days a week. You're getting married, and guess what? They are still playing softball five nights a week. Anything wrong with that? Well, not really, if both people are still in agreement with that, correct?
Correct.
But we don't even entertain that. Okay, here's something a little bit more subliminal, and I would love for you to chat about this. I go out one night a week and I go with my friends and they go with their friends and I go out one night a week. And so my pattern is I go one night a week and all of a sudden I'm home by 10. I'm just making that up. I go out and I'm home by 10. But then I start not to come home by 10. And time goes on and now I'm home at 10:30. Well, okay, just creeping along, 11 o'clock. This is what you call an implicit psychological contract. And here's the crux of the matter of what you said. The other person is like, I can live with 10 o'clock, but we never talk about it. The other person is like, yeah, 10 is not enough. I'm just going to go to 10:30 and 11. What that is looked at as is a broken promise, a broken contract. It is the worst kind, and it shows up in relationships and jobs where because of a pattern of behavior, and that pattern of behavior is thought as an expected expectation. I'm expecting them to come at 10. And then when they don't, tell me what happens with that, Dr. A.
Resentment builds. Dreaded resentment. Brené Brown, I love Brené Brown's definition of expectations. He says they're premeditated resentments. And it's true. You highlighted several things in what you just shared, Dr. Pat. One of those things is that expectations are often unspoken. They're not talked about. And what I found really interesting, I've been doing couples work for 30 years. And I will tell you, this is something that floats in the air often. And one of the things that I was really struck by is, you had mentioned it, when people get married, they don't think that things are going to change. And they do. Guess what changes? Expectation. That's what changes. Before people get married, they're open and, they're responsive to each other's needs. And then somehow they get married and they have that piece of paper and there's an expectancy. And one of the things that I get a good chuckle out of is how often, and believe me, I've had this conversation so many times with couples, how often they believe that marriage is a thing that everybody agrees on in terms of what it should look like. Yep. And I've always been struck by that. And so then what ends up happening is partner A has this idea of what it should look like, and partner B has a different idea. They never talk about it. They never agree on it. They don't have contracts. They don't have agreements. And before you know it, they're fighting and they're angry with each other. And the rest is history. They're sitting in my office on my couch. I want to throw something out that is probably going to be a controversial, and people aren't going to like it. Come from a victim's mindset. It's not an ownership mindset. It's a victim's mindset. What do I mean by victim's mindset? So basically, a victim mindset is a mindset where there's a belief. There's a belief that life is happening to us. Not that we're in charge of our lives, but it's actually happening to us. And expectations are a reflection of a victim mindset. Now, why is that? Because what's happening is when we have an expectation, basically what we're doing is we are passively waiting for the other person to figure out what it is that we want or need. And oftentimes that other person gets it wrong. And so when they get it wrong, we're angry, we're upset, we feel mistreated. And in reality, we're just sitting and waiting for this person to get it right. And instead, what we need to be doing is taking charge of our life and going into action and taking responsibility for our own needs.
And let's take it to the next level. There are certain things that'll happen in life. I remember when I was doing the research on this, I had very little real knowledge of what people were talking about. But expectations and realities present a challenge. Let's just say that. Funniest story, I can talk about this couple. They know I share this story. Two women, couple, marriage, the whole thing. During the, what do we want to call it? Dateship, courtship? I don't know what we call it anymore. But whatever that is, funniest thing. It's funny to me. It wasn't funny to them. One of them always would have these phenomenal dinners, like OMG. Like, what is that? Like cordon bleu something and this pasta something. And it was like, right? 3 or 4 times a week, this would go on. Definitely on the weekends, this would go on. This happened for an entire year. Then they get married. Then they're like moving in together.
I think I know where this is going.
Person A says to person B, what are we having for dinner tonight? Right? Person B says, I have no idea. I have no idea of even how to cook. Person A says, like, what are you talking about? You had dinner. I said, you know that restaurant down the street? I just had a line of credit with them, and they would deliver everything, and I would just put hello right now. That is a tricky situation. Now, they didn't end up in divorce court, but if you have a problem with lying, and this is the scenario here, this person over here, their trigger point and young life damage had to do with telling lies, parents telling lies. This person didn't really lie, but never really said. So 3 to 4 times a week, you got this with the salad, with the dressing, with the whole thing put on a plate. You could never find evidence of any of the takeout bags. Hello, nowhere, not even in the garbage. And so the answer was, yeah, let me just call down there. But now you're together. You're not spending your individual money. Now you've got a $200 takeout bill per week. You see, people don't realize that expectations formed and not communicated or talked about, and they turn to an outcome. This happens all the time. You know what the greatest broken contract has ever been in the United States and around the world? It was the repeal of the psychological contract of employment. And that thing happened in the early 90s. And what happened overnight, Dr. A, think about this. This is even worse than the dinner thing, right? Now, I will tell you the happy ending is they both took cooking classes together. It really turned out really well, right? Because I said, you know what, let's go, both of you go learn how to cook. Okay, that turned out really well. And actually one of them, the one who would buy the dinner, turned out. But the repeal of the psychological contract of employee, the minute Exxon did the first downsizing, and I think AT&T, we were the second, It changed everything. It said, I am going to be able to fire you at will. What was the repeal of that? There was an expectation, and clearly, that if I work for you for what, I don't know, 30, 40 years or something, you're going to reward me with a pension and medical. I have every right to believe that of you, Dr. A, and your company, because that's what happened before. That's an implicit statement. Companies never said that I would do that forever and for everyone, because the hidden contract is you have employment at will. You remember how shocked people were when they went through the early stages of downsizing? Now it's like, we don't expect that. But do you remember what that period was like in the 90s when that was happening?
Absolutely.
Devastating.
Yes. Yes. It's interesting because we have expectations on so many levels, right? In so many worlds. It's not just between two people. Like you said, it could be between your employer and you, or companies, or between companies. I think what's really important about this conversation is that, expectations are implicit. They are unspoken. And it's a setup. It's a setup for misunderstanding. It's a setup for resentment and frustration. And, I think this is really important. I think this is a very important conversation that we're having today, because I watch this with my clients get really twisted up around this, and, get really hot under the collar, that they have this expectation that something should be the way they believe it should be. And then they are deeply saddened when it doesn't unfold that way.
Oh my gosh. And there's so many levels to it. We're talking today about expectations. I want people to really take this in, because if you listen to what Dr. A and I are saying, we're saying this so you become more aware, that you incorporate your own AI level of understanding the multifaceted nature of your life. Let me give you something simple. I would love for you to comment on this. Let's say it's your same couple and they go buy a house, right? And there they are, they buy a house, they're paying off their mortgage, but they want a line of credit. They want to go borrow on their home. Most people think I have a right to borrow on my home. I know I've got $700,000 of equity. I only have $100,000 left on my mortgage. Why can't I have the money? OMG. I was just counseling a couple on this the other day, and it was one of the hardest, what's the word we use? I don't like the word intervention, but it was hard because I understood it so carefully from a personal level. When they realized that they had to qualify at so many levels to get money that they've paid into their house, I can't even explain that, because their expectation, in your words, was, and there's a line between expectation and entitlement, and these are very close cousins. I'm entitled to take money out of my bank because this is my house. No, it's not. It's the bank's. So you see how multi-layered this is? Every aspect of our lives that we drown ourselves into expectations, but even more importantly, it's the outcome of the expectation that kills us. You see, you can have an expectation and let go of the outcome, and therefore an expectation is like a little teeny e. It's a nothing, because you may expect this, but if it don't turn out that way, you're going to go on with your life. You're going to take cooking classes because you love that person. You love that person more than the facade. But this is tricky water to navigate. And I want to ask you this. Where does this tie in to being fully empowered in the empowered living zone? Because I don't know that you can be if you're that addicted to your expectations. Now, that's a strong word.
Many of us are addicted to our expectations. We find safety in it. It's how it makes our world feel safe. And quite frankly, it's an illusion. It's not real. We can talk about that. This is a great time to take a break. I think when we return, we will talk about this. We'll talk about how to let go. What happens? What do you do instead? Instead of having expectations, which I said again is coming from a victim mindset, we want to be in ownership. We want to be empowered. What does it look like? How do we translate expectation into agreement? And what are agreements? How are agreements different than expectations? So we will discuss this further when we get back from our break. We're back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and with Dr. Pat. And we're going to talk about the antidote to expectations, and that is agreements. And, what are agreements? Agreements are definitely different from expectations. Agreements are clear, conscious, and are the key to creating relationships that are built on trust, mutual respect, and true understanding. And the difference between agreements and expectations is that agreements actually are a reflection of the ownership mindset. And what is the ownership mindset? The ownership mindset is when we take charge. We are responsible for our own well-being, our own happiness, by setting clear, conscious agreements with ourselves and others. So what does it look like to enter an agreement with somebody? First and foremost, it starts and it requires open and honest communication and taking responsibility for ourselves and our needs. First and foremost. Yeah. Now, I want to go back to the examples that I gave before. I'll give the example of the male partner, or how about I'll give the example of the female partner when she was like, I don't want to tell him how I feel or what I need. They should just know. Okay. So what would that look like for, how would I coach this person? What would a turnaround look like? What would it look like to engage in an agreement and shift away from an expectation? So it could start with something like, hey, I realized that I was expecting you to read my mind and know how I feel or what I need. And I recognize that that's not serving me. And what I'd like to do is to actually talk with you about this. And what I want to be able to do is, I understand that this is really hard for me. I feel really vulnerable when I'm sharing what I need or I'm sharing hard feelings. And what I would like is, if I come to you and I say, hey, I'd like to talk with you about something that's going on for me, that you would hear that and you would be willing to sit with me and say, can we talk about this? Does that work for you? And I think what's really important, and when I share this, Dr. Pat, is that when you're approaching another person regarding an agreement, what is different about an agreement in comparison to an expectation is that you do not expect absolute agreement from the other person. This is an open conversation. This is an invitation for a discussion. It is not a directive, but it is an invitation. And I think that that is really important, because what's important about agreements is that agreements are a two-way street. Agreements involve, here's my perspective, here's my experience, this is what I'm needing. I want to see where you are with it. How do you feel about it? What is it that you need? And what can we agree on based on where I am and what I need, and where you are and what you need? So that's really important. You were talking about something that you brought up is, how do we know, or how is shifting from an ownership shifting from expectations, which is a victim mindset, into agreements, which is an ownership mindset. How is that related to empowerment? Why do I make those connections? It is really important, because what is empowerment about? Empowerment is about being in charge of yourself. Empowerment is about creating the life that you want. Empowerment is about being aware of what you need and learning how to get what you need. And so you're in the driver's seat. When you are in expectation, you are in the back seat. And you're just hoping that the car is going to go where you want to go. That is the opposite of empowerment. Empowerment is being in the driver's seat, entering agreements, coming from an ownership mind is all about empowerment. Would you like to say anything about that, Dr. Pat?
I'm glad you made the distinction. I'm going to be very clear. The minute you walk into the world of agreements, you're entering a contract, a psychological and sometimes a binding contract. The minute you do that, you're in the world of obligations. That is it. The difference between an expectation and agreement is now you're in obligations as promissory. These are promises you're making, whether you believe it or not. They are promissory in so many ways. They're promissory psychologically, they're promissory physically, they're promissory. And because of that, you're taking the time to communicate probably ad nausea. If you're in a relationship with a Virgo, you're going to spend a lot of time in detail, right? Believe me, I know. But on the other hand, they're binding, and they're binding at a psychological level. See, that's the difference. Expectations are a machination of what's going on up here based on probably 5 different past lives, something that happened at your birth, a boss you didn't like, and now who knows, some reflection. But the minute you enter into a dialogue about an agreement, like the 2 people I mentioned, from that point on, what was going to be the game changer? The game changer was, how do we get past what I thought was a broken promise, but no, I never promised you to cook this kind of meal I never made that promise. However, it was still an agreement. This is so important. You have to make the shift. Why? Psychological contracts and obligations are points of stability for people. I go and buy a car. I pay for a black SUV. You bring out a white one and you tell me it's the only one you have, and I am not going to be happy. You see, agreements stem from so many very specific things. What do we do here? What have we been doing? You ever hear people at a wedding do their vows? Right? Once upon a time, they were really different. Now, I just witnessed the ceremony. The couple had the same thing to say. I vow to love you. Okay, I vow to love you. End of the vow. That was the vow. That was the only thing that these 2 could sit down. Because the world has changed. But I will tell you that this particular distinction that we're talking about, it's not negotiable. The minute you enter an agreement, it's obligatory. And there's no question about it in one person or the other person's mind. And you may think, oh, no, I just made an agreement to come home at 10 o'clock. But what's a big deal? I didn't come home. So I'm not coming home at 10. Oh, it's no big deal. I'm coming home at 10:30. I'm coming home at 11. You know what the kicker is in the workforce right now? This is like an epidemic. And it's driving older school. God, I don't know the right words. I'm probably going to get an email on this. It's driving some managers a tad like a little berserko. What do you think it is that's happening in the workplace? Do you have any idea? Okay, I'll tell you. Some people believe if you're supposed to be in at 7:30, 8 o'clock, 5:30, 10 o'clock. And I'm not talking about card punching, because I've punched cards. And I'm telling you, you punch a card that you're not in on time, oh my God. Like, you got to get your union steward out. This is making for a very difficult world in the workplace, because there's some managers that really care. You're supposed to be in at 8. You came in at 8:05. It is as if, and I'm serious, in workplace, this is a problem. That is an agreement. You are obligated in that boss's mind to come in at 7. If I look at your calendar, Dr. A, and you say you're supposed to show up on this call right? We started at 12. Everybody's expecting you to show up, your audience. Now, life happens. Every once in a while, that's true. But you can see how these agreements, and that's an agreement, that's an employment agreement. Couples make agreements. What's the big deal? I'm coming home at 10:30, but anyway, this particular deal, this went from 10 o'clock to midnight. I mean, that was like out of control, right? But there was never an agreement. There was never a conversation that I would go out with my buddies and be home by 10. I just came home at 10 because we weren't having any fun. Okay, who knew that? But this taps at the veins of empowerment. It puts everybody in a victim state. The boss that expects you to be in at 8 o'clock and not 8:05 or 7:30 or 9:30, I don't care what it is. But that boss that expects you to do that, and then you who think you have some flexibility. And when your boss is like all over your case, you're like, I hate my job. So you see how this gets out of control. Empowerment must have a dialogue. Because what goes on in my head and what goes on in your head and nobody else knows about it, good luck with that. I did the laundry for a year and all of a sudden I stopped doing the laundry. What does your partner think? Like nobody's doing the laundry. Like I just don't do the laundry anymore, right? These are important things. But let's talk about how we get past them. Because when you shift from expectation to agreements, it's so much easier if we just would talk about them. How much pain could you save people if they just talked about it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's actually the key difference between expectations and agreements is communication. You know, when we hold expectations, we've created the whole story and, we've created the requirements and story in our head. And somehow everybody's supposed to know and supposed to follow it, which is, when you really think about that, when I say that out loud, it sounds so silly, yet people live this way and they are going to experience a lot of frustration because guess what? Not everybody thinks the way we do. And I think what is beautiful about agreement, it's interesting because I have gotten pushback with clients, particularly couples, when I say, let's talk about agreements. And they're like, this is a relationship. Why do we have to have contracts? So I'll get that pushback and I'll say, well, why not? Agreements are just personal contracts. And what is really cool about this is when there is a conversation and needs and wants are communicated explicitly, and both parties are communicating explicitly their perspective, their values, their needs, their wants, and they negotiate and they enter agreement, what you're going to see is a person is more likely to follow through with the agreement because, as you said, there's an obligatory nature to it. It's like, I agreed to this. I signed up for this. And so you're more likely to get what you want after this negotiation because both parties have entered a mutual understanding of what will happen next. And so this is a win-win. This is not, and I want to make this really clear because I see this lots of times in couples, and I don't believe in compromise. Compromise means there's a winner and there's a loser. And somebody is going to be upset at some point. And so I don't believe in compromise. I believe in agreements. And agreements are, you are owning your decision to enter this agreement in this relationship. And I think that is really important. I also think that it is empowering. And ironically, people think that holding on to expectations create predictability. No, it doesn't. Entering agreements, you're more likely to get the thing that you need. And so that is more predictable.
Yeah. I want to talk about something. I know we've got a little time left, but I want you to talk about it too. There are consequences. And it's a strong word, but I want to tell people what they are so that you know how powerfully you can build your agreements and relationships. If you understood that you not coming home at 10 o'clock, even though you didn't talk about it and not having a conversation about it, it deteriorates trust. So let's talk about it. What is at stake? Psychological health, relationship, the psychological health of a relationship. Let's just talk about that. And the individual satisfaction. I am not happy here, right? Mm-hmm. Trust, major. The relationship trust, not just between you and two people, but you and the car company that just rolled out that white SUV. What do you have a propensity to do? Leave. Fair and equitable treatment. Let's talk about what else gets damaged. Commitment. You no longer have the commitment to work on it, be in it, or do anything about it. You see, and then let's talk about the rabbit hole effect. If you don't remedy this, or you don't sit down with Dr. A, or you don't really realize that you have something that has to be fixed, what happens is your entire performance profile of how you relate in the world around promises, obligations, and other people completely deteriorates. That's not just for individuals. When that stuff happens in the workplace, it is a nightmare. The other part of this is when you start to have this kind of stress in continuous broken agreements, your physical health suffers. You see, so if you worked on how to build them, you fulfill an empowerment bank account. You pull up your power. You become more equally empowered, even with the idea of, yeah, I can do this if you do this. But tell us from where you sit, what can people to do to make the shift so that we are not taking from and we are putting in to our empowerment bucket?
Great question, Dr. Pat. And you hit on something that I think is really important. Agreements are the building blocks to trust. They are the bricks in that wall of trust. And I think that's really very, very critical. And, question is, how do you shift from this place? Like I said, expectations, we all have them. They're unconscious. You're absolutely right. They often come from life experience, past life experiences, traumas, whatever you want to say. But what's most important about it is they tend to be unconscious. And they also tend to be somewhat oppressive. It's like my worldview and what I believe is important and what I believe is valuable, it should be the same thing that you believe. And when you really think about how silly that sounds, it's ridiculous that we believe that there are other people on this earth that are here specifically to meet our needs. It's just really crazy when you think about that. So what do you do instead? You're saying, how do you shift from this place? It's a different worldview. It's a different mindset. And what do you do? First and foremost, and I always say this, it starts with self-awareness. It starts with, and one of the things I will do, I'm not exempt from this, Dr. Pat. I will say to myself, what is my should here? And one thing that I want to put out here is, we're talking about agreements in the context of relationship. And one thing that we have not put out on the table that I think is really important, Dr. Pat, is this also pertains to ourselves. We are in relationship with ourselves, and we can also go down that road of expectation with ourselves, and we can feel the repercussions of that, whether it is a lack of confidence, lack of self-trust, depression, anxiety, that when we go down the road of expectation, these are the costs. And we have these same agreements with ourselves, and we build the trust with ourselves, just like we do with other people. So first and foremost, it's being aware, stopping, going inside, being introspective, asking yourself the question, what are my shoulds here? So you look at the shoulds. Then what you do is you translate those shoulds into what do I need? What do I want? How do I feel about this particular situation? Then the next step is communication. Communication is key. Being able to have the courage to sit down with that other person and say, hey, this is where I'm coming from. This is what's happening for me. This is what I'm needing in the situation. Talk to me about your perspective and where you are. And can we reach some agreement that is mutually beneficial, that will work for both of us? So, I think about the situation that you brought up with going to the table tennis classes, and you said, I chose not to say something. That would have been a perfect opportunity for you to go to the coach and say, hey, I've noticed that you keep doing A and it's just not working for me. Can we have a conversation about this? This is where I'm coming from. Can you tell me where you're coming from? And can we reach an agreement on this? And I think that that's really important.
If you don't, there's no place for you to go. There's something to be said about fight or flight, but there's an alternative to that. It's called communicate. But what you're talking about is, what is that old school expression that I grew up with? I never understood it till later in life, but I'd get it all the time. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't even understand. I never understood what that meant, right? You have to be willing to hit a pause button. And I think that's what you're talking about, the empowered living zone. And, you as the queen of empowerment, right? That is the outcome we're in search of. And so we're just talking about one very important thing today that can happen many times a day, where we either do this right with agreements and expectations, or we don't. If we do it well, there's nothing to really talk about unless something changes. If we don't, 9 out of 10 people don't know what to do next until you get to the point of eruption. And then what happens is what? The blow up in the kitchen about the awful spaghetti you made because I didn't know you didn't know how to cook. Nobody wants that. And in the workplace, it's devastating. I had a situation with someone who was devastated about 2 months ago, who got fired from a job. And I said, why? She said, well, my boss said I've been late 3 or 5 days a week for 3 months. And I said, like late how? He kept a sheet and he showed that I was late 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. I said, okay. And I said, did you know you were late? She said, yeah, I knew. I got here as quick as I could. I had to drop my kid off. There was a sister. I said, did you talk to your boss? She said, no. Did your boss talk to you? She said, no. So you got 2 people. He's keeping the cheat sheet. Like, honestly, right? Never brought her in and say, what's going on, Mary? We need you here at this time. There's nobody. I know we're oversimplifying it, but there's no way you can step into the empowered living zone if you don't nail this one. There are too many agreements that are made on an everyday basis that we are just not aware of, right? What do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is definitely, I would say that this is one of the building blocks of being empowered, and that is taking charge. Being empowered is about taking charge of your experience, your needs, your wants, your desires. You are in the driver's seat, and reaching agreements, opening discussions for agreements are a demonstration of empowerment. And what happens with that is it takes out of the equation the guessing. Like, for example, you brought up this situation with this woman who lost her job. She had
like on the spot
idea. She had no idea that her boss was keeping score. Can you imagine what would have happened had maybe 2 or 3 times in she was late, that her boss had come to her and said, hey, I've noticed this pattern. This pattern is that you're somewhere between 3 and 10 minutes late, and that doesn't work for me. It's important to me that you are on time. So can we have a conversation about this? What's going on for you? What is making it difficult for you to be at work on time? And she could say, boss, I have to drop my kids off at the before school program, and it doesn't even open until 8 o'clock. So the fastest I could get here would be 8:07. The boss could go, I get it. I understand it. I understand that this is something you need to do. How about we make an agreement that your start time is 8:10? Will that work for you? So what's important about this is there is a conversation that is big enough to hold the perspective of two people. And I think that that's really important. And then you agree on something that works for both of you.
Yeah.
Very important.
And don't you agree that this particular aspect of empowerment is almost at the top of the food chain because it has so many negative consequences if it's violated, right?
Absolutely.
Don't you think it does?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I think agreements are the hammer in the toolbox.
I
have lots of hammers in the toolbox.
They're the hammer in the toolbox. Just as a sidebar, let me end with this. I love women's basketball. I love women's sports. I love sports, but I love what's happening to the WNBA, the Women's Basketball League. And I do believe Caitlin Clark has been a catalyst for that. I also believe there are a lot of women that play the sport. Now, here's the problem. Caitlin Clark comes and she's expected to shoot 3-pointers all the time and get them in. This is not college. So what does she do? She gets past all the naysayers and she changes her game. Because for her, that wasn't her expectation. Her expectation of herself was she is going to be a great player. And maybe sometimes you have to change things. But the rest of the world wants to see her shoot 3-pointers. Until now. Why now? Because her change changed our expectations of her. So we got aligned with her expectations to be a great player. Why does that count? Because the expectation of being a great player is to take her team into the winning column. Is she and that team doing that? They are. So can we forgive her for not taking as many 3-point shots? You see, this is how dynamic what you and I are talking about really is, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Pat.
Thank you for this topic. We're going to have to do a part 2 on this because I would love to talk about how do you build up your empowerment bank account from these? And how do you even know what the impact is of not coming home at 10 o'clock? Sorry, that was such a real situation. Thank you for today's show. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this conversation has sparked new insights and inspired you to start making agreements rather than holding on to expectations in your relationships. Remember, you have the power to create the life and relationships you desire, one agreement at a time. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, leave a review, share it with others who might benefit from the discussion. And if you want to work with me personally, please contact me through my website, www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. And until next time, stay empowered and take good care of yourself. Thank you for tuning in to the Empowered Living Zone show with me, Dr. A, to create the life you crave. Tune in on the first and third Tuesdays at noon Pacific time on transformationtalkradio.com and get ready for another show. Say yes to creating positive and empowering change in your life and move beyond life's challenging terrain into the zone of success. Be ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision in the Empowered Living Zone. For more information on how to do deep transformational work with me and to create the life you crave, visit empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's empoweredlivingcoaching.com. See you next time.